The cafeteria erupted in laughter as Zara Washington's tray crashed to the floor. Spaghetti sauce splattered across her vintage thighs like blood at a crime scene. Marcus Chen, captain of the basketball team, stood over her with that practiced smirk wealthy boys wore like armor, his phone still recording her humiliation. But through the crowd of smartphones and cruel grins, she didn't see him. She saw the 3 Korean exchange students in the corner booth, and the one in the center had just stood up. His obsidian eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Something ancient and possessive flickered across Kang Minho's face. And in that moment, as sauce dripped down her curves and the whole school laughed, he decided she was his to protect, his to claim, his to burn the world down for. And Marcus Chen had just signed his own death warrant. Welcome to Afro Korean Romance Stories Besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Zara's hands trembled as she knelt on the cafeteria floor, reaching for the plastic tray that had become the physical manifestation of her worst nightmare. The laughter echoed off the walls of Roosevelt Academy's pristine dining hall, each cruel giggle another nail in the coffin of her carefully maintained invisibility. She'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of being overlooked, of taking up as little space as possible despite her curves, of existing in the margins of this elite private school where her scholarship status already made her an outsider. "Oops," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false sympathy as he filmed her on his phone. "Guess they need to make those aisles wider, huh? Can't have you taking up the whole cafeteria." His friends roared with laughter, and Zara felt the familiar burn of tears threatening behind her eyes. She wouldn't cry. She'd learned that lesson freshman year when Jessica Park had accidentally spilled paint on her art project. Tears only fed them. The thing about cruelty at schools like Roosevelt Academy was that it came wrapped in expensive cologne and designer clothes. These weren't random acts of teenage meanness. They were calculated, surgical strikes designed to remind scholarship kids like Zara exactly where they stood in the hierarchy. And Marcus Chen, with his family's hotel empire and his perfect SAT scores, sat firmly at the top of that pyramid. What Zara didn't know, couldn't have known as she scrambled to clean marinara sauce off the Italian marble floor, was that her life was about to change completely. Because in the corner booth, surrounded by the remnants of their lunch, 3 young men watched the scene unfold with varying degrees of interest. 2 of them, Lee Jae-sung and Park Tae-min, had seen this kind of bullying before and had mostly learned to ignore it. American high schools were brutal in ways their exclusive Seoul Academy had never been. But the 3rd member of their group, Kang Minho, felt something snap inside his chest like a bone-breaking clean. He'd been watching Zara Washington for exactly 47 days, though she'd never noticed. How could she, when she spent so much energy trying not to be noticed herself? He'd cataloged the way she tucked herself into corners of the library, how she always chose the seat closest to the wall in their shared calculus class, the way she wore oversized sweaters that hid her curves like armor. Minho came from a world where power was currency and weakness was punished without mercy. His father controlled half the underground economy in Seoul, a fact carefully hidden behind legitimate business fronts and political connections. Minho had been sent to America ostensibly to finish his education, but really to establish connections, to learn how power operated in this new territory, to prepare for the day he would take over the family empire. He'd never expected to find someone, that made him forget about duty and legacy and carefully laid plans. But 47 days ago, Zara had walked into calculus class with a book on African American art history tucked under her arm, and when she'd smiled at something on the page, really smiled like the world wasn't constantly trying to make her smaller, Minho had felt his carefully controlled heart stutter. Now, watching Marcus Chen film her humiliation like it was entertainment, Minho felt a different emotion entirely. Rage, pure and cold and absolutely lethal. The kind of rage that in his world ended with bodies in the Han River and businesses burned to the ground. He stood before he'd consciously decided to move, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a blade being drawn. "Minho, don't." Jae-sung warned in Korean, his hand shooting out to grab his friend's arm. "You know what your father said. Low profile. No attention." But Minho shrugged him off, already moving across the cafeteria with the predatory grace that came from years of Hapkido training. Students instinctively moved out of his way, some primal part of their brains recognizing a predator in their midst, even if they couldn't articulate why. Zara was still on her knees when a pair of expensive leather shoes appeared in her line of vision. She looked up, expecting another tormentor, and found herself staring into the most beautiful face she'd ever seen. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls, lips pressed into a thin line of barely controlled fury. Kang Minho looked at her like she was the only person in the room, and for a moment, Zara forgot how to breathe. "Get up," he said, his English perfect but accented in a way that made her stomach flip. It wasn't a request. He extended his hand, palm up, waiting with the infinite patience of someone who'd never been refused anything in his life. Zara stared at that hand like it might burn her, very aware of the absolute silence that had fallen over the cafeteria. Everyone was watching now, but instead of mockery, she saw confusion, speculation, fear. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with a firmness that felt like a promise, and he pulled her to her feet in one smooth motion. Only then did he turn to face Marcus, and Zara felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Minho didn't raise his voice, didn't make any obvious threats, but somehow his very presence felt dangerous. "Apologize," Minho said simply, his eyes locked on Marcus with an intensity that made the other boy take a step back. Marcus laughed, but it sounded nervous now, uncertain. The basketball captain was used to being the apex predator in this ecosystem. He wasn't sure what to do with someone who looked at him like he was prey. "Dude, it was just a joke. She wasn't watching where she was going." Marcus started, but Minho cut him off with a single step forward. Suddenly, they were standing chest to chest, and despite Marcus having 2 inches on him, Minho somehow seemed larger, more threatening. "I don't repeat myself," Minho said quietly, so quietly that only Marcus and the people immediately around them could hear. "Apologize to her. Now, or I will make you regret every second of your privileged life." Something in Minho's tone, in the absolute certainty of his threat, made Marcus's face go pale. He looked around for backup, but his friends had suddenly developed a keen interest in their shoes. Even Tiffany Martinez, Marcus's on-again, off-again girlfriend, had taken several steps back. Finally, Marcus turned to Zara, and she saw real fear in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, barely audible. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "Louder," Minho commanded, still not breaking eye contact with Marcus. "So everyone who laughed can hear you." Marcus's jaw clenched, but he repeated it louder. "I'm sorry, Zara. I wasn't watching where I was going." The apology hung in the air like a declaration of war, because everyone in that cafeteria understood what had just happened. The hierarchy had shifted, and Kang Minho had just claimed Zara Washington as someone under his protection. Before anyone could react, Minho turned back to Zara, his expression softening in a way that made her heart stutter. "Come," he said, extending his hand again. "Sit with us." It wasn't really a request, but somehow Zara didn't mind. She let him guide her across the cafeteria to the corner booth where his friends watched with varying degrees of shock. Jae-sung and Tae-min exchanged a look that clearly said they needed to have a serious conversation with their friend later. Minho settled Zara into the booth with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence he'd just threatened, then slid in beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. "I'm Kang Minho," he said, as if she didn't already know his name. As if everyone in school didn't know about the mysterious Korean exchange students who drove cars that cost more than most people's houses. "These are my friends, Lee Jae-sung and Park Tae-min." "Zara," she managed, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "Zara Washington." Her hands were still shaking slightly, adrenaline from the confrontation mixing with something else. Something that had to do with the way Minho was looking at her like she was the most important thing in the room. "I know," Minho said simply, and the implication of those 2 words, that he'd noticed her, That he'd learned her name, that she'd been on his radar, made Zara's stomach flip. "You're in my calculus class. You always sit in the back corner by the window." The fact that he'd noticed, that he'd paid that much attention, should have been creepy. But something in the way he said it, like he was confessing something precious, made it feel different. The lunch period ended in a blur of whispered conversations and stolen glances. Zara felt the weight of the entire school's attention on her back as she walked to her next class, but for once, she didn't try to make herself smaller. Maybe it was the lingering warmth of Minho's hand on hers, or the way he'd looked at Marcus like he was willing to commit murder in the middle of the cafeteria. Whatever it was, Zara walked into history class with her head up for the first time in 3 years. That evening, Zara found a text from an unknown number. "This is Minho. Jae-sung got your number from the student directory. I hope that's okay. I wanted to make sure you got home safely." She stared at her phone for a full minute, trying to figure out what universe she'd stumbled into, where boys like Kang Minho texted girls like her. Boys like him dated girls like Tiffany Martinez. Tall, thin, effortlessly beautiful. They didn't notice scholarship students who wore thrift store clothes and carried the weight of their mother's double shifts in every movement. But he had noticed. He'd more than noticed. He'd claimed her in front of the entire school, had threatened Marcus Chen with an intensity that still made her shiver when she thought about it. Zara's fingers hovered over her phone keyboard for several minutes before she finally typed back, "I got home fine. Thank you for what you did today. You didn't have to do that." His response came immediately. "Yes, I did. No one should treat you that way. Can I see you tomorrow? Before school?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. This was a setup. Had to be because boys like Minho didn't actually want to spend time with girls like her. This was probably part of some elaborate prank, though she couldn't figure out the angle. But even as suspicion warred with hope in her chest, she found herself typing. "Okay, where?" His response made her breath catch. "The library, 7 a.m. I'll bring coffee. How do you take it?" She stared at that message for so long her screen went dark. He wanted to know how she took her coffee, like it mattered, like he was planning to remember. Finally, she typed, "Cream, 2 sugars." His reply was simple. "Perfect. I'll see you tomorrow, Zara." She fell asleep that night clutching her phone to her chest, trying not to hope too much, trying not to imagine that maybe, just maybe, something impossible was beginning. The next morning, Zara arrived at the library at exactly 7 a.m., half convinced she'd find it empty, that the whole thing had been a cruel joke. But Minho was already there. Leaning against the wall outside the entrance, 2 coffee cups in his hands and an expression on his face that made her stomach flutter. He was wearing black jeans and a simple white t-shirt that somehow looked expensive on him. And when he saw her, his entire face transformed with a smile that felt like sunrise. "You came," he said, like there had been any doubt, like he hadn't been entirely certain she would show up. He handed her one of the coffee cups and their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending electricity up her arm. "I wasn't sure if you preferred light or dark roast, so I got medium. I hope that's okay." The fact that he was nervous, that this clearly mattered to him, made something in Zara's chest crack open. They sat on the library steps as the campus slowly came to life around them. And Minho asked her questions no one had ever asked before. What books made her cry? What did she want to do after graduation? Why did she always draw in the margins of her calculus notes? And Zara found herself answering honestly, found herself laughing at his dry observations about American high school culture, found herself noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. "Why me?" she finally asked, the question she'd been holding back since yesterday's cafeteria showdown. "You could be friends with anyone. Marcus Chen, all those kids, they would kill to have you in their group. So why are you sitting here with me?" Minho was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face like he was memorizing every detail. "I've been watching you for weeks," he admitted, and Zara's breath caught at the confession. "The way you disappear into yourself, Like you're trying to take up less space. The way you always eat lunch alone with a book. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on a problem in calculus. He leaned closer, and Zara could smell his cologne, expensive and distinctly him. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Zara? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Minho reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and she found herself leaning into the touch without conscious thought. I see someone who's been taught to believe she's too much. Too loud. Too big. Too present. But the truth is, you're perfect exactly as you are. And anyone who can't see that is blind. Tears pricked at Zara's eyes because no one had ever said anything like that to her before, had ever looked at her curves like they were beautiful instead of something to apologize for. Minho, I don't understand what's happening here. Boys like you don't... People like you don't want... But he cut her off, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. People like me? He repeated. And there was something dangerous in his tone now. Something that reminded her of the way he'd looked at Marcus Chen. Zara, you have no idea what kind of person I am. Where I come from, what I'm capable of. His eyes searched hers, and she saw shadows there. Secrets. But I'll tell you this. From the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. I don't know how to explain it. I just know that I'm done watching you from across the room. I'm done pretending I don't think about you constantly. I'm done letting people like Marcus Chen make you feel small. The intensity of his confession stole her breath. This wasn't some teenage crush. This was something darker, more consuming. And despite every logical reason to be afraid, Zara found herself leaning closer, drawn into his orbit like a planet unable to escape its star. What are you saying? She whispered, needing him to spell it out, needing to hear the words. Minho's hand slid to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her curls with a possessiveness that should have scared her but instead made her feel safe, wanted, claimed. I'm saying you're mine now, he said, his voice low and rough. I'm saying I will destroy anyone who tries to hurt you. I'm saying that I don't care what Roosevelt Academy thinks is possible or appropriate. I want you, and I'm done pretending otherwise. The warning bell rang, shattering the moment. Students began streaming past them toward the building, and Zara was suddenly very aware of the stares, the whispers. She pulled back slightly, and Minho's hand tightened for just a second before reluctantly releasing her. We should go, she said, her voice shakier than she wanted. We'll be late for homeroom. But as she stood, Minho caught her wrist, pulling her back for just a moment. This conversation isn't over, he promised, and the heat in his gaze made her knees weak. Tonight, let me take you to dinner. It wasn't a question, but Zara found herself nodding anyway, helpless against the pull between them. As she walked into the building, she could feel his eyes on her back, could feel the weight of his claims settling over her shoulders like a cape. The rest of the day passed in a haze. In calculus, Minho moved from his usual seat in the middle of the classroom to the back corner beside Zara, ignoring the teacher's surprised look and the whispers that erupted around them. He didn't speak to her during class, but every few minutes his hand would find hers under the desk, squeezing gently, reminding her that yesterday hadn't been a dream, that this beautiful, dangerous boy had really claimed her in front of their entire school. At lunch, Taemin and Jae-sung joined them at Zara's usual isolated table, and she found herself liking Minho's friends despite her initial nervousness. Jae-sung was funny and irreverent, making jokes about American cafeteria food that had her laughing until her sides hurt. Taemin was quieter, more observant, but kind in a way that felt genuine. And through it all, Minho sat beside her with his thigh pressed against hers, a constant reminder of his presence, his claim, his protection. But not everyone was happy about the new arrangement. Halfway through lunch, Tiffany Martinez appeared at their table, her perfect features twisted into something ugly. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, she said to Zara, ignoring Minho entirely. But everyone knows this is just Marcus's bet with a twist. Minho's just using you to get back at Marcus for that thing with his car last month. The words landed like physical blows, and Zara felt her chest tighten. Of course. Of course there was an explanation. Boys like Minho didn't actually want girls like her. This was all just some elaborate revenge scheme. She started to pull away, but Minho's arm wrapped around her waist, holding her in place with gentle but unmovable strength. "Tiffany," he said, his voice arctic. "I suggest you walk away. Now." But Tiffany wasn't done. "Everyone's talking about it, about how you're slumming to prove some point. Do you really think she's dumb enough to believe you actually want her?" She laughed, cruel and sharp. "Look at her, Minho. She's not exactly your type." The cafeteria had gone quiet again, everyone watching to see how this would play out, whether the spell Minho had cast yesterday would hold or shatter under scrutiny. Minho stood slowly, and even though Tiffany had 6 inches on Zara, he still somehow towered over both of them. "You want to know about my type?" he asked, his voice carrying across the silent cafeteria. "My type is brilliant women who don't tear others down to feel superior. My type is curves that make my hands ache to touch them. My type is dark skin that looks like silk and honey. My type is soft and strong and absolutely done apologizing for taking up space." He turned to Zara then, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. "My type is Zara Washington, and if anyone in this school has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." He extended his hand to her, and this time, when she took it, she let him pull her to her feet. "Come on, we're done here." And just like that, they walked out of the cafeteria, leaving stunned silence in their wake. That evening, Minho picked Zara up in a car that probably cost more than her house and took her to a Korean restaurant in the city that clearly wasn't open to the general public. The owner greeted Minho in Korean, bowing deeply in a way that suggested respect mixed with something that looked like fear. They were seated in a private room with traditional floor cushions and a low table, and for the first time since yesterday, they were completely alone. "Tell me about yourself," Minho said as they waited for food. "The real you, not the version that hides in corners." So Zara told him about her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to keep them afloat. About her father, who died when she was 10, leaving them with debt and grief. About her dreams of studying art history, of traveling to all the museums she'd only seen in books. And Minho listened like every word mattered, like he was cataloging pieces of her soul. When she finally worked up the courage to ask about him, Minho's expression shuddered slightly. "My family is complicated," he said carefully. "My father owns businesses in Seoul, import-export mostly. He sent me here to learn the American market, to make connections. To be honest, Roosevelt Academy is mostly a cover." He met her eyes and she saw something dangerous lurking there. "I'm not a good person, Zara. I come from a world where violence is currency and loyalty is everything. I shouldn't want you the way I do. You deserve someone clean, someone uncomplicated." Zara reached across the table, her hand finding his. "What if I don't want someone clean?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "What if I want you, complications and all?" Minho's fingers tightened around hers and she saw his careful control fracture. "You don't know what you're saying. If you knew the truth about my family, about what I've done." But Zara cut him off, leaning closer. "Then tell me. Show me. Stop trying to protect me from yourself." The food arrived, interrupting the moment, but the tension between them only grew as they ate. Minho taught her how to use chopsticks properly, his hands gentle as they guided hers, but every touch felt electric. He fed her bites of bulgogi and kimchi, watching her reactions with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. And all the while, she could feel the current running between them, building towards something inevitable. After dinner, instead of taking her home, Minho drove them to an overlook that gave a view of the entire city spread out below like scattered diamonds. He killed the engine, and suddenly the only sound was their breathing in the close quarters of the car. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice rough. And after I do, if you want me to take you home and never speak to you again, I'll understand. Zara's heart hammered as Minho explained what his father really did. The underground economy he controlled, the legitimate businesses that served as fronts, the violence that was sometimes necessary to maintain power. He told her about growing up in that world, being trained to fight and kill and never show weakness. He told her about the real reason he was in America, not just to learn business, but to establish connections with the Korean mob presence in the US, to prepare for the day he would inherit his father's empire. So you see, Minho finished, his jaw clenched. I'm not some innocent exchange student. I'm my father's heir, his weapon, his future. And I have blood on my hands, Zara. Real blood. People have died because of orders I gave, because of fights I won, because in my world, mercy is weakness. He finally looked at her and she saw fear there. So now you know. And I'll understand if... But Zara silenced him by grabbing his shirt and pulling him toward her, crashing their lips together in a kiss that was clumsy and desperate and perfect. Minho froze for half a second before responding with a hunger that matched hers, his hands coming up to frame her face as he deepened the kiss. She gasped against his mouth, and he took advantage, his tongue sliding against hers in a way that made her entire body light up. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zara pressed her forehead against his. I don't care, she whispered fiercely. I don't care about your past or your family or any of it. All I care about is the way you look at me like I matter, like I'm worth protecting, like I'm worth everything. Minho made a sound low in his throat, almost a growl, and kissed her again, harder this time, possessive and claiming. His hand slid down to her waist, pulling her closer despite the awkward angle in the car. Zara, he breathed against her neck, his lips trailing fire across her skin. You have no idea how long I've wanted this. Wanted you. I've been going insane trying to stay away, trying to be good, trying not to completely claim you. She cut him off with another kiss, her fingers tangling in his hair. Then stop trying, she gasped. Stop being good. Just be mine. Something snapped in Minho at her words. He pulled her into his lap, careful despite his hunger, and kissed her like he was trying to memorize the taste of her mouth. His hands roamed her curves with reverence, tracing the lines of her body like he was mapping territory he planned to claim completely. Zara had never felt desired like this, had never been touched like she was precious and powerful and absolutely necessary for someone's survival. Every kiss, every touch felt like Minho was branding her as his. The windows fogged as they lost themselves in each other, hands exploring, mouths desperate, bodies pressed together as close as the car would allow. Minho whispered to her in Korean, words she didn't understand but felt in her bones, promises that sounded like prayers. When his hand slid beneath her shirt, mapping the soft skin of her stomach, she arched into his touch, wanting more, wanting everything. But Minho pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged, his control clearly hanging by a thread. Not here, he said roughly, resting his forehead against hers. Not in a car like some teenager who can't control himself. You deserve better than this. Deserve everything. Zara felt her heart crack open at the gentleness in his voice, at the way he was trying to protect her even from himself. Take me home then, she whispered. But this isn't over. Minho's smile was pure heat. No, this is definitely not over. I'm just getting started with you. Zara Washington. The drive back to her house was torture, Minho's hand never leaving her thigh, his thumb drawing maddening circles that made her squirm. When they finally pulled up outside her small house, Zara hesitated before opening the door. My mom's working the night shift at the hospital, she said quietly. She won't be home until morning. The implication hung in the air between them, an invitation and a question. Minho's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles going white. If I come inside, he said carefully, his eyes burning into hers. I'm not going to want to leave, and I'm not going to be able to keep my hands off you. So you need to be very sure, Zara, because once I claim you completely, there's no going back. You'll be mine, and I don't share. I don't let go. The possessiveness in his tone should have scared her. Instead, it made her core clench with want. She opened the door, then looked back at him. Then come inside and prove it. Minho followed her into the small house, his presence somehow making the familiar space feel different. Charged. Zara barely had time to lock the door before he had her pressed against it, his mouth finding hers with a hunger that stole her breath. His hands gripped her waist, holding her in place as he kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, desperate to eliminate any space between them. Bedroom. Minho growled against her mouth, and Zara took his hand, leading him down the narrow hallway to her small room. It was nothing like what he was probably used to. No expensive furniture, no designer anything. Just her twin bed with its worn quilt and walls covered in art prints she'd collected over the years. But Minho looked at her room like it was a temple. Looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the entire world. He backed her toward the bed slowly, never breaking eye contact, giving her time to change her mind, to push him away. But Zara didn't want to push him away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to be claimed and marked and made his in every way possible. When the back of her knees hit the mattress, she sat, and Minho knelt before her, his hands framing her face with devastating gentleness. "Tell me you want this," he demanded softly. "Tell me you're sure." "I'm sure," Zara whispered, her hands coming up to cover his. "I want you, Minho. All of you." That was all the permission he needed. He kissed her again, laying her back on the bed, his body covering hers with delicious weight. His hands explored her curves with reverence, mapping every inch of skin he could reach, whispering Korean words against her throat that sounded like worship. When he finally stripped away their clothes, touching her with hands that shook slightly despite his usual confidence, Zara felt tears prick her eyes at the tenderness in his gaze. What followed was slow and intense and absolutely world-changing. Minho took his time learning her body, discovering what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch, what made her cry out his name. He was gentle when she needed gentleness, fierce when she needed more, and through it all, he whispered promises against her skin, promises of protection, of devotion, of a future Zara had never let herself imagine. When they finally came together completely, moving as one, it felt like something sacred, like they were forging a bond that went deeper than just physical. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her small bed, Minho's arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she might disappear. Zara traced the scars on his chest, evidence of a violent life she was only beginning to understand, and felt Minho press a kiss to her temple. "I love you," he said quietly, the confession hanging in the darkness like a vow. "I know it's too fast, too soon, but I need you to know. I love you, Zara. Completely. Irrevocably." Zara's breath caught because no one had ever said those words to her before. Had ever looked at her like Minho was looking at her now, like she was his entire world. "I love you too," she whispered back, and felt his arms tighten around her. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two broken pieces fitting together to make something whole. But in the morning, everything changed. Zara woke to find the bed empty beside her, the sheets cold where Minho had been. Panic seized her chest as she sat up, pulling the blanket around herself, looking for any sign of him. Had last night been a mistake? Had he regretted it the moment it was over? Had she been right to fear that this was all too good to be true? Then she heard voices from the kitchen, low and urgent, speaking rapid Korean. She dressed quickly in sweats and one of Minho's shirts that he'd left draped over her desk chair. Breathing in his scent for courage, then crept down the hallway. Minho was in her kitchen, fully dressed, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in clipped, angry Korean. Whatever the person on the other end was saying, it was clearly bad news. His free hand was clenched into a fist, and when he saw Zara in the doorway, his expression cracked for just a moment, revealing fear. He ended the call abruptly and crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms like he was trying to memorize the feel of her. "I have to go," he said against her hair, his voice rough. "Something's happened in Seoul. My father. There was an attack. A rival family. I have to get on a plane in 2 hours." Zara pulled back, looking up at him, trying to read the emotions warring across his face. "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know," Minho admitted, his jaw clenching. "A week, maybe more. It depends on how bad the situation is." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "But I will come back, Zara. I promise you. Nothing. Not my father's war. Not my responsibilities. Nothing will keep me from you. Do you understand?" She nodded, even though fear was crawling up her spine. "What should I do while you're gone? At school, I mean. Marcus and Tiffany? Jae-sung and Taemin will watch over you." Minho interrupted firmly. "I've already called them. They know you're under my protection. And if anyone tries anything..." His expression went deadly. "You call me immediately. I don't care what time it is, what I'm doing, you call me, promise me." Zara promised, and Minho kissed her one more time, desperate and claiming before forcing himself to pull away. "I have to go, my flight..." He looked torn, like leaving her was physically painful. "Go," Zara said, even though her heart was breaking. "Do what you need to do. I'll be here when you get back." Minho kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth, like he was trying to brand the memory of her onto his soul. Then he was gone, and Zara was left standing in her kitchen, wrapped in his shirt, trying not to cry. She told herself it would be fine, that he'd be back soon, that nothing would change. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to fall apart. The next day at school felt like walking through a minefield. Without Minho's presence, the protective bubble he'd created around Zara evaporated instantly. The stares were back, but now they were worse. Speculation, judgment, pity. She could hear the whispers everywhere she went. Had they actually slept together? Was she really dumb enough to think a guy like Minho would stick around? Everyone knew this was just a game. Poor scholarship girl, she actually believed he cared. At lunch, Jae-sung and Taemin appeared at her usual table, and Zara felt a rush of gratitude. They sat with her like Minho had, creating a physical barrier between her and the rest of the cafeteria. "He called us," Jae-sung said in his lightly accented English. "Made us promise to protect you. You must be very special. I've never seen Minho like this about anyone." Taemin nodded seriously. "His father's situation is bad. Very bad. But he'll be back as soon as he can." But 1 week turned into 2, then 3. Minho called every night, but the conversations grew shorter, more strained. He sounded exhausted, stressed in ways he wouldn't explain. "The situation here is complicated," was all he would say. "My father needs me. The family needs me. But I'm working on it, I promise. Just hold on a little longer." And Zara tried to hold on, tried to believe him, but it was hard when every day at school brought new humiliation. Marcus Chen had recovered from his initial shock and was making up for lost time. He couldn't touch Zara directly. Jae-sung and Taemin made sure of that. But he found other ways to hurt her. Photos started circulating. Photoshopped images of Zara that made her look ridiculous. Someone created a fake social media account in her name, posting desperate messages about Minho. The whispers followed her everywhere. "Did you hear? Minho's engaged to someone in Korea. It was arranged by his family. He was just using her for fun." The worst part was that Zara started to believe them. As days stretched into weeks with no sign of Minho returning, doubt crept in like poison. Had she been a fool to trust him? Had last night in her bed meant nothing to him? Was she really just some American girl he'd used to pass the time before returning to his real life? She tried to talk to him about it during their calls, but he always deflected, always promised he'd explain everything when he got back. By the 4th week, Zara had stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria entirely. She couldn't handle the stares, the whispers, the pitying looks from people who'd never cared about her before. She spent lunch periods in the art room, losing herself in painting, trying to create something beautiful out of all the pain. That's where Taemin found her one afternoon, paint splattered across her hands, tears streaming down her face as she worked on a canvas that was half beauty, half rage. "He's coming back," Taemin said quietly, sitting beside her. "I know it doesn't feel like it, but Minho keeps his promises. The situation in Seoul is worse than any of us expected. His father was nearly killed. The family is at war. But he's coming back for you, Zara. I've known him my whole life, and I've never seen him care about anything the way he cares about you." But Zara couldn't quite believe him anymore. The pain had gone on too long. That evening, when Minho called, Zara finally asked the question that had been eating at her for weeks. "Are you engaged?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long she thought the connection had dropped. Then Minho's voice came through, rough with what sounded like guilt. "It's complicated." Those two words broke something in Zara's chest. "That's not an answer," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes or no, Minho? Are you engaged to someone else?" "My father arranged a marriage before he was attacked," Minho admitted, and Zara felt her world crumble. "It's political, business, meaningless, but I can't just break it without consequences. I'm trying to find a way out, But Zara couldn't listen anymore. "You should have told me," she whispered. "Before we slept together, before you made me fall in love with you, you should have told me." She hung up before he could respond, then turned off her phone as it immediately started ringing again. The next day at school, Zara moved through classes like a ghost. She ignored Jae-sung and Taemin's attempts to talk to her, ignored everyone actually, focusing only on getting through each hour without breaking down completely. At lunch, she hid in the art room again, but this time someone found her. Someone she wasn't expecting. Marcus Chen stood in the doorway, but instead of his usual smirk, his expression was almost apologetic. "I heard what happened," he said, moving into the room slowly, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. "With Minho. About the engagement." Zara didn't look at him, just kept adding angry brushstrokes to her painting. "Come to gloat?" Marcus surprised her by shaking his head. "Actually, no. Look, I was a complete asshole to you. That thing with the tray, the video, all of it, I was wrong. And I'm sorry, really sorry." Zara finally looked at him, searching his face for the trap, for the punchline. But Marcus looked genuine, almost ashamed. "Why are you telling me this?" He shrugged, sitting on one of the art stools. "Because I know what it's like to have your life planned out by your family. My parents have been pushing me toward Harvard, toward taking over the hotel business, toward marrying the right kind of girl since I was 10. I've been so busy trying to fit their mold that I became someone I don't even recognize. Someone who hurts people for no reason." They talked for over an hour, and Zara found herself seeing Marcus in a completely different light. He was still arrogant and privileged, but underneath that was someone struggling with the same pressures she'd seen in Minho: family expectations, obligations, the weight of a legacy he hadn't asked for. By the time the bell rang, they'd reached something that almost felt like understanding, maybe even the beginning of friendship. Marcus walked her to her next class, and for the first time in weeks, Zara didn't feel completely alone. Unfortunately, someone photographed them together. By the end of the day, images of Zara and Marcus walking side by side, talking and almost smiling, had spread through the school and beyond. One of those photos made it to Seoul, to Minho's phone, and all hell broke loose. Minho called her 17 times in 1 hour. He texted until her phone was vibrating constantly. Finally, Zara answered, and his voice came through the line sharp with barely controlled fury. "What the hell are you doing with Marcus Chen?" Minho demanded, speaking in English but his accent thicker with emotion. "After everything he did to you, you're smiling with him? Walking with him?" The jealousy in his voice was palpable, possessive, and part of Zara was glad he was hurting too. "We were just talking," she said flatly. "Something you and I seem to have stopped doing. Or did you forget? You're engaged to someone else, Minho. You don't get to be jealous. I told you it's complicated, Minho growled. I'm trying to fix it, but these things take time. In my world, you can't just walk away from arranged marriages without consequences. But I am working on it, Zara. Every day I'm fighting my father, fighting the family, trying to find a way back to you. His voice roughened. But seeing you with him, with anyone, I can't handle it. You're mine. You promised me. And you promised me you'd come back. Zara shot back. Years of being made to feel too much finally breaking free. You promised me nothing would keep you away. But it's been 4 weeks, Minho. 4 weeks of me being humiliated at school, of people telling me I was stupid to believe you actually cared, of learning you're engaged from rumors instead of from you. So forgive me if I don't feel particularly owned right now. The silence on the other end was thunderous. When Minho finally spoke, his voice was low and absolutely deadly. I'm getting on a plane tonight, and when I get there, we're going to have a very long conversation about exactly who you belong to. He hung up before she could respond, and Zara stared at her phone, her heart hammering. Part of her was terrified. Part of her was thrilled. And part of her just wanted to see him again, to have him hold her, to feel his arms around her and know that he was real. Minho landed in Chicago exactly 16 hours later, and his first stop wasn't his apartment or the school. It was Zara's house. He showed up at 7 in the morning, looking like he hadn't slept in days, his suit wrinkled, his eyes wild with something that looked like fear and fury combined. Zara opened the door in her pajamas, and before she could say anything, Minho had her pressed against the wall, his hands framing her face, his forehead against hers. Don't ever do that again, he breathed, his voice shaking. Don't ever make me think I'm losing you. I flew 10,000 miles because the thought of you with someone else, with Marcus Chen of all people, made me want to burn down the entire world. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, and she saw tears in his eyes. I love you. Zara, I love you more than my father's approval, more than my family's empire, more than my own life. And I will find a way out of this engagement, I swear it. How? Zara demanded, even as her traitorous body leaned into his touch. How are you going to get out of an arranged marriage? Your father nearly died. Your family is at war. This is the worst possible time to defy them. Minho's jaw clenched, and she saw determination in his eyes that bordered on madness. Then I'll make them understand. I'll refuse the marriage publicly if I have to. I'll walk away from the inheritance. Whatever it takes, Zara. I'm not losing you. But before they could continue the conversation, Minho's phone rang. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his entire face went pale. It's Jae-sung, he said, answering in Korean. The conversation was rapid and urgent, and Zara watched Minho's expression shift from concern to pure fury. He ended the call and looked at her with eyes that promised violence. Get dressed. Now, something's happened at school. The drive to Roosevelt Academy was tense and silent. Minho wouldn't tell her what was wrong, just kept his jaw clenched and his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. When they arrived, there was a police car in the parking lot and students were gathered in small groups, whispering. Jae-sung and Tae-min met them at the entrance, and what they told Minho made his entire body go rigid with rage. Someone had vandalized Zara's locker. Not just graffiti or mean words. Someone had broken in and destroyed everything. Her textbooks were shredded, her art supplies ruined, and worst of all, they'd taken the one photo she kept taped to the inside of her locker door. A picture of her father from before he died. The photo was ripped into pieces and scattered on the floor. And written across the locker in permanent marker were words that made Zara's stomach turn. Korean whore. Too fat for him anyway. He's just using you. Minho stared at the destruction for a long moment, his breathing carefully controlled. Then he turned to Jae-sung. Find out who did this, he said quietly in English. I want names. Today. The deadly calm in his voice made even Jae-sung look concerned. Minho, maybe we should let the school handle. But Minho cut him off with a look that could have stripped paint. I said find out who did this. I don't care how. Offer money, threaten people, Hack the security cameras. I want names. Over the next few hours, through methods Zara probably didn't want to know about, they got answers. It had been a group of girls, Tiffany Martinez and 3 of her friends, all girls who'd made Zara's life hell for years. They'd broken into her locker during early morning before anyone else arrived, thinking they'd get away with it. They'd underestimated Minho's resources and his complete unwillingness to let this go. By lunchtime, all 4 girls were called into the principal's office, and by the end of the day, they'd been suspended pending expulsion. But that wasn't enough for Minho. That evening, Tiffany's father, a wealthy investment banker, received a very interesting phone call. His firm's biggest client, a Korean conglomerate that accounted for 30% of his business, suddenly threatened to pull all their accounts unless certain conditions were met. The conditions included a formal written apology from Tiffany to Zara, a substantial donation to a scholarship fund in Zara's father's name, and Tiffany's transfer to a different school. By the next morning, all conditions had been met. Zara sat in Minho's apartment, a sleek penthouse she'd never seen before, holding the restored photo of her father. Minho's people had somehow pieced it back together, had it professionally restored, even had it reframed. "You didn't have to do all that," she said quietly, but Minho just pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Yes, I did. No one hurts what's mine without consequences. And you are mine, Zara. Engaged or not, complicated situation or not, you are mine and I am yours." "What about your fiancé?" Zara asked, the question she'd been avoiding. Minho was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her hip. "Her name is Lee Ji-won. Our fathers arranged the marriage 2 years ago. She's the daughter of my father's oldest business partner. I've met her exactly 3 times, always with chaperones, always in formal settings. She knows I don't want this marriage any more than she does." He tilted Zara's chin up, making her meet his eyes. "But the problem isn't Ji-won. The problem is our fathers, their alliance, the business interests tied up in this engagement." "So what are you going to do?" Minho's smile was sharp enough to cut. "I'm going to do what I should have done weeks ago. I'm going to choose you over duty, over family, over everything. My father is recovering from the assassination attempt. He's weak right now, not in a position to fight me the way he normally would. So I'm going to present him with an ultimatum. Release me from this engagement, or I walk away from the family completely." Zara's breath caught. "Minho, you can't. That's your entire life, your inheritance, everything you've been trained for since birth." But Minho just kissed her, soft and deep, pouring everything he felt into the kiss. "My entire life means nothing without you in it. I learned that these past 4 weeks. Every day away from you felt like dying slowly. I don't care about the empire, the money, any of it. All I care about is you." But before Zara could respond, Minho's phone rang again. This time, when he answered, the color drained from his face. He listened in silence for several minutes, then ended the call and looked at Zara with an expression that made her stomach drop. "That was my father," he said quietly. "He's coming to Chicago, tomorrow, and he's bringing Ji-won and her father with him." The implications were clear. This was a power play, a way to force Minho's hand, to make him choose in the most public way possible. The next evening, Minho insisted Zara attend the formal dinner his father had arranged at the city's most expensive Korean restaurant. "I want him to meet you," Minho said firmly. "I want him to understand exactly why I'm refusing this marriage." So Zara wore the one nice dress she owned, a simple black number that hugged her curves, and walked into that restaurant on Minho's arm like she belonged there, even though she'd never felt more out of place in her life. Minho's father, Kang Dae-jung, was a silver-haired man with eyes exactly like his son's. Dark, calculating, absolutely ruthless. He looked at Zara the way someone might examine a bug under a microscope, with clinical interest but no real emotion. Ji-won was beautiful in that effortless way rich girls always were, but she looked as uncomfortable as Zara felt. The dinner was tense and formal, conducted mostly in Korean that Zara couldn't follow, but she understood the undercurrents. Minho's father was not happy. Finally, Dae-jung switched to English, his accent thicker than his son's, but still perfect. So you are the reason my son wishes to break a contract that has stood for 2 years. It wasn't a question. Zara lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. If Minho wants to break the engagement, that's his choice. But yes, I love him. And he loves me. Dae-jung's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Love is a luxury people in our world cannot afford. My son has responsibilities, obligations. Then he should be free to choose whether or not to accept those obligations. Zara countered, and felt Minho's hand squeeze hers under the table in support. With all due respect, Mr. Kang, arranged marriages belong in another century. Minho deserves the chance to choose his own life. For a long moment, Dae-jung just stared at her. Then he turned to Minho and spoke in rapid Korean. Whatever he said made Minho's entire body go rigid. My father says I can choose. Minho translated, his voice tight. But if I choose you, I forfeit my inheritance. I walk away from the family name, the business, everything. I become nothing, just another immigrant with no prospects. He looked at Zara, and she saw fear in his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. Not fear of his father, but fear that she would tell him to take the inheritance, to choose duty over her, that she would make this decision for him. But Zara had been made to feel too small for too long to let anyone, even someone she loved, make themselves small for her. What do you want? She asked Minho, ignoring everyone else at the table. Not what your father wants, not what I want, not what's expected. What do you want, Minho? And in that moment, she saw something in his expression crack and transform. He looked at his father, then at Jiwon, then back at Zara. And he smiled. I choose her, Minho said clearly. In English, so everyone could understand. I choose Zara. I choose love over duty, happiness over obligation, freedom over everything you've built. If that means walking away from the family, then I walk away. Dae-jung's expression went cold, and he said something in Korean that made Jae-sung and Tae-min, who'd been standing guard near the door, actually flinch. But Minho just stood, pulling Zara to her feet with him. I'm done, Minho said to his father, switching back to Korean, but speaking slowly enough that Zara caught phrases here and there. I'm done being your weapon, your heir, your puppet. I'm 19 years old and I've already killed for you, bled for you, sacrificed everything for the family name. But this hurt. This is where I draw the line. He looked at Zara with such fierce love it made her chest ache. She's worth more than all of it. They walked out of that restaurant together, leaving shocked silence behind them. In the parking lot, Minho pulled Zara into his arms and just held her, his face buried in her hair. I have nothing now, he said quietly. No inheritance, no family support, nothing but what's in my bank account and the trust fund my mother left me. Is that enough? Am I enough? Zara pulled back just far enough to kiss him, pouring everything she felt into it. You're everything, she whispered against his mouth. We'll figure out the rest. And they would have driven off into their uncertain future together if Minho's phone hadn't rung one more time. He answered it, expecting his father's fury, but instead heard Jae-sung's panicked voice. Something had happened. Something terrible. Marcus Chen had been found beaten nearly to death behind the school, and the police were looking for Minho. The accusation was that Minho had ordered the attack, revenge for Marcus's earlier treatment of Zara. It didn't matter that Minho had been at dinner with his father when it happened. His reputation, his background, made him the obvious suspect. The police brought him in for questioning, and suddenly Zara found herself sitting in a police station, waiting to give a statement, watching through a window as they interrogated the man she loved. She told them everything. That Minho had been with her, that he would never do something like this, that they had the wrong person. But it was Taemin who finally uncovered the truth. The attack on Marcus hadn't been ordered by Minho at all. It had been ordered by Dae-jung. Minho's father, furious at being defied, had decided to teach his son a lesson about the consequences of choosing love over duty. He'd ordered his men to attack Marcus, knowing Minho would be blamed, knowing it would destroy any chance Minho had at a normal life with Zara. It was calculated, cruel, and absolutely in character for a man who saw people as chess pieces to be moved and sacrificed. When the evidence came to light, security footage, witness statements, even one of Daejung's own men who talked in exchange for immunity, the charges against Minho were dropped. But the damage had been done. Daejung was arrested, facing charges for assault and conspiracy. The Kang family empire that had taken 3 generations to build began to crumble overnight, and Minho was left standing in the wreckage, technically free but emotionally devastated. "He did this because of me," Minho said that night, sitting in Zara's small bedroom, his head in his hands. "Because I chose you over him. Marcus almost died because I fell in love with you." But Zara wasn't having it. She knelt in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "Your father did this because he's a monster who can't accept that his son is a better man than he ever was. This isn't on you, Minho. And it's definitely not on us." Over the next few weeks, everything changed. With Daejung in prison awaiting trial, control of the legitimate Kang businesses fell to Minho by default. He was the only heir, and someone had to manage the assets. Minho worked with the FBI to dismantle the illegal operations, to separate the legitimate from the criminal, to try to salvage something good from his father's empire. It was exhausting. Overwhelming work that aged him years in a matter of months. But through it all, Zara was beside him. She helped him make decisions, reminded him to eat and sleep, held him when the weight of it all became too much. And slowly, they built something new. Minho donated most of his inheritance to charity, keeping only enough to ensure they'd be comfortable. He finished his senior year at Roosevelt Academy, though the scandal had made him infamous rather than just mysterious. And through it all, he and Zara grew closer, their love deepening from passionate attraction into something more profound: partnership, trust, absolute commitment. By graduation, they'd become that couple that everyone talked about. The reformed mob heir and the scholarship girl who'd saved him. Marcus Chen, recovered from his attack, actually gave a speech at graduation about second chances and the importance of choosing kindness over cruelty. He and Zara had become genuine friends, bonding over their shared experience of suffocating family expectations. And when Marcus publicly apologized again for everything he'd put her through, the entire auditorium applauded. After graduation, Minho and Zara decided to defer college for a year, to travel, to see the world beyond Chicago and Seoul, to figure out who they were outside of their family's expectations and their traumatic pasts. They went to Paris, to Rome, to Lagos, to all the places Zara had dreamed of visiting when she studied art history. Minho photographed her in front of every museum, every famous painting, capturing her joy on film like he was afraid it might disappear. In a small chapel in Italy, exactly 1 year after that first cafeteria encounter, Minho proposed. Not with an enormous diamond or a grand gesture, but with his mother's simple gold band, the only piece of his family legacy he'd chosen to keep. And the promise that he would spend every day of the rest of his life making her feel valued, loved, seen. Zara said yes through happy tears, and they were married that same day in a ceremony attended only by Jae-sung, Tae-min, Zara's mother, and Marcus Chen, who'd become an unexpected but genuine friend. 2 years later, Zara stood in the kitchen of their modest Chicago apartment, her hand on her slightly rounded belly, watching Minho on the phone trying to negotiate a business deal. He'd started his own import-export company, completely legitimate this time, and was slowly building something that belonged to them, that had no blood money or dark secrets in its foundation. When he hung up and saw her watching, his entire face transformed with that smile he reserved only for her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, crossing to her and placing his hand over hers on her stomach, feeling for the flutter of movement that would be their daughter in 5 more months. "Good," Zara said honestly. "Happy. Safe." Minho kissed her temple, then her lips, then knelt to press a kiss to her belly. "Hi, little one," he murmured. "Your mom and I can't wait to meet you." And Zara looked down at this man, this beautiful, dangerous, devoted man who'd given up everything for her, and felt her heart overflow. Because the truth was, she'd given up things too. She'd given up her need to be invisible, her fear of taking up space, her belief that she was somehow too much. Minho had taught her that she was exactly enough, that her curves were beautiful, that her presence mattered. And in return, she'd taught him that power wasn't about control or fear, but about choosing love even when it cost everything. They'd both sacrificed their old lives, their old selves, to build something new together. On a cold Chicago evening, very much like the one when they'd first met, Zara and Minho sat by the window of their apartment watching snow fall over the city. Their daughter kicked inside Zara's belly, and Minho's hand never left her stomach, feeling for each movement like it was a miracle. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked quietly. "Giving up your inheritance, your family name, all of it?" Minho was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Not once," he finally said, pulling her closer. "Every morning I wake up next to you. Every night I fall asleep with you in my arms. I'm building a business I'm proud of, a life that's mine, a family that will never know the violence and cruelty I grew up with." He placed his hand over her heart, feeling it beat against his palm. "You gave me freedom, Zara. You gave me the courage to choose myself over duty. How could I ever regret that?" Zara leaned into his embrace, feeling the weight of their daughter between them, the promise of their future. Outside, the city glittered with possibility. Somewhere out there, Minho's father sat in prison, paying for his crimes. Somewhere out there, Marcus Chen was probably studying for the Harvard entrance exams his parents had finally let him defer for a year. Somewhere out there, Jae-sung and Tae-min were building their own lives, free from the weight of their family's expectations. And here, in this small apartment with no view and no luxury, Zara and Minho had everything that mattered. "I love you," Zara whispered. Minho kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. "I love you more. You and our daughter. My whole world." And outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in white, making everything clean and new. Just like them, reborn from the ashes of their old lives into something beautiful, something chosen, something absolutely theirs. The Korean mafia heir and the plus-size black girl who'd saved each other, who'd chosen love over everything, who'd built an empire of two out of sacrifice and devotion and unshakable faith in each other. This is their story. This is how it ends and how it begins. With love conquering duty, with two broken people making each other whole, with a family built on choice rather than obligation. Minho's hand rested on Zara's belly, feeling their daughter move, and he smiled. Because this quiet moment, this simple happiness was worth more than any inheritance, any empire, any legacy his father had tried to force on him. This was everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, besties.